Hey, everybody, welcome back to our journey through the Bible. For those of you who have been reading along with our daily readings, you know that we've now moved into the book of Ezra in our Old Testament readings. Ezra it's one of those biblical texts that we really don't encounter very often. It's not especially long. It doesn't cover any of those heroic individuals or major stories that typically grab our attention in the Old Testament. So it just doesn't tend to make its way very often into our reflections or into our studies. The thing about the book of Ezra, however, is that it covers this pivotal time in the life of the Israelites and this critical moment that I think speaks volumes to what it is to live life in God. Ezra and Nehemiah, which will come next, they cover the initial post-exilic history of the Israelites in the late 6th and into the mid-5th century BC. A bit earlier, in the turn of the 7th into the 6th century, Judah found itself caught in the midst of this battle between Egypt and Babylon. People within Judah actually became embattled with one another over which one of those to support. The region was often caught up in military conflict, and eventually, in 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon ended things once and for all as he leveled Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple. He took many of the people into captivity, and he chased many others away. And all of that began what is known as the Babylonian exile. Some 50 years later, Ezra picks up that story on the back end of that exile with these words. This is the opening of Ezra. This is the entirety of chapter 1, which is only, I think, 11 verses long. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a herald throughout all his kingdom, and also in written edict he declared, "Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of those among you who are of his people, may their God be with them, are now permitted to go up to Jerusalem in Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let all survivors, in whatever place they may reside, be assisted by the people of their place with silver and gold, with goods and with animals, besides free will offerings for the house of God in Jerusalem. The heads of the families of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred, got ready to go up and rebuild the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors aided them with silver vessels, with gold, with goods, and with animals, and with valuable gifts besides all that was freely offered. King Cyrus himself brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and he placed it in the house of his gods. King Cyrus of Persia had them released into the charge of Mithridates, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the inventory: gold basins, 30, silver basins, 1,000, knives, 29, gold bowls, 30, other silver bowls, 410, other vessels, 1,000. The total of gold and silver vessels was 5,400. All these Sheshbazzar brought up when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem. Now you'll see as we read on in Ezra that it takes a bit for the temple reconstruction to truly begin, and a lot of Ezra's text revolves around that central theme and that central process. What I think is important to note, however, is this resurrection story for the people of Israel, and the reminder that it is for all of us that our story, whatever that story may be, is never over. Think back to our earlier readings and reflections about the construction of the temple in the first place. Having finally settled in Jerusalem, David wanted so desperately to build that temple, but of course it was Solomon who would be given that privilege in the end. And for the next 400 years, that temple would stand as the heart of the people of God. There were trials and tribulations, no doubt, but that temple continued to stand as the physical reminder of God's ceaseless presence with his people. When that temple was destroyed, it was a strike at the heart of God's people. They were taken into captivity. They were chased away from their homes into surrounding lands. They were torn apart from their families and communities. As that building fell, the very core of their communal identity was destroyed right along with it. And they lived in that sense of sorrow and desperation for over half a century. But their story wasn't over. The truly remarkable thing, I think, about considering the return to Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple is its reminder of the resurrection nature of our faith. Think through those biblical stories that we know so well. The story of a broken world overcome by flood that ends in a rainbow and a promise of a better future. The story of a couple aged well beyond their years being given the gift of a child and a descendancy that would reach countless numbers. The story of a people of God trapped in slavery and subjugation being brought to new beginnings and grander futures. The story of Saul being struck blind on the road to Damascus, only to see more clearly than ever the promise and possibility of the path that stood before him. The story of a death on a cross conquered in the emptiness of a tomb that meant new life for each and every one of God's beloved children. I could go on and on with these, but the rebuilding of the temple is one in a series of profound reminders that ours is a resurrection faith. Ours is a faith in which tomorrow forever holds possibilities that seem impossible today. Ours is a faith in which no end is an end. Our faith is one in which even death and destruction are only temporary because the love and power of God is forever capable of resurrecting a better tomorrow. There are times, sometimes more than we feel we can handle, in which this life brings us into that moment of darkness, that moment of pain, that moment of such strife that it truly does feel as though our world is collapsing around us. It is into those very moments, however, that this story screams out the reminder that our faith is a faith in which tomorrow forever holds possibilities that seem impossible today. That ours is a faith in which no end is ever an end. So, I encourage you, just take this story, take this reminder to heart. It's my prayer that you don't feel this way right now. It's my prayer that this message finds you in a place in which this is a subtle reminder and not a desperate need. If it is a need, cling to it. If it's a reminder, hold on to it. Because either way, that time will come. That moment will descend upon us. We will reach that circumstance in which we feel as though our world is collapsing around us. And in that moment, there's nothing that brings greater hope than the reminder that ours is a resurrection faith, that ours is a faith in which even death and destruction is only temporary, because the love and power of God is forever capable of resurrecting a better tomorrow. Let's be in prayer together. God of unimaginable works, of countless resurrections, both great and small, instill within us the hope that comes from knowing that there is always a better tomorrow that's possible in you. Give us the heart to know that promise, the faith to trust that even when life's darkest moments descend upon us, we can stand strong in the knowledge that in you there is forever the hope of resurrection. In his name, amen. I thank you, as always, for joining me. I hope you'll be with us Sunday for worship, either here in person or on Facebook. And I look forward to seeing you next week as we continue our series on Journey Through the Bible. Have a wonderful afternoon.